Welcome to Against the Current, a podcast created to give public and private sector leaders, both current and emerging, as well as advocates and cultural voices, a platform to share their perspectives with candor and conviction. Each episode goes beyond talking points to uncover the real stories, challenges, and lessons shaping today's most important causes. These conversations connect directly to decision makers, donors, and supporters who want to understand not just what an organization does, but why it matters. You'll hear how faith guides leadership, how conviction drives action, and how bold ideas are shaping the future of freedom and culture, both here at home and around the world. Here is your host, Matt Waters.
Welcome to Against the Current podcast. My name is Matt Waters, and I have the pleasure of hosting Governor George Allen, former governor of Virginia, former senator, former delegate. And Governor, we're glad to have you here. And just I'm going to put my cards on the table. I was a young man at George Mason. I was part of the A team for your election to the governor's mansion here in Virginia, in Richmond. And you did some really phenomenal things. I mean, your career spans. I mean, you started as a House delegate. That's for
I had, first of all, Matt, it's great to be with you, but I was in Thomas Jefferson's seat in the House of Delegates. This is the way we'd refer to it, Albemarle and Nelson counties.
Yeah, a Jeffersonian conservative, right? And that's what you kind of went by. And I can tell you that campaign, I'll bring back some old memories, but I was in, when you were campaigning, I guess maybe it was governor, must have been, or Senate, but you were down in Newport News, Virginia, in downtown, and I was at an event with the Empowerment Network. And, this ran against Mary Sue Terry this time for governor. And it was all African-American audience. And you showed up, and Mary Sue did not show up. And I remember, again, I was at a tabletop of 10, and I was the only white guy there, and these African-Americans there. And I said, we know that the fact that Mary Sue didn't show up, and you showed up, what made a really big impression, and you ended up going on to win that election. And that's just, I share that story. And then the other thing I'll say that I remember as governor, I believe as you were governor, one of the first things you did is you went down to Interstate 64, the toll booth that charges money for people going into Virginia Beach, where you now reside. And you went on with a construction hat and you tore that toll booth down because that road had been paid for, for 20 years. And there's a collective hooray from those of us in Hampton Roads who frequent the beach.
All right. These are great memories, Matt. In that governor's race, we started off 31% behind, but we had an audacious agenda, truth in sentencing, rather than, abolishing the lenient dishonest parole system, wanted welfare reform. So able-bodied people, you promote the work ethic rather than reward idle behavior and whole families and so forth. And the economic development type ideas, I hadn't thought of this Newport News one until you just brought it up. But one of our promises were enterprise zones. We wanted 50 enterprise zones in Virginia, which we ultimately did. This was a Jack Kemp idea. And in fact, we actually had several of them in Newport News. And as far as the African-American or Black vote, we ended up with 23% of the Black vote of African-Americans, which isn't really great, but compared to most Republicans, it's double what Republicans get. And then the other, on the Virginia Beach toll road, they wanted to keep the tolls going to then fund some other roads in Virginia Beach. I said, well, put a toll on that. The promise was made that, years ago, way before I was governor, decades before, that once the tolls are sufficient to pay for the maintenance and upkeep of it for many years to come, the tolls would come off. And the Democrats were against doing that until they saw, I guess, from polling that this was really popular. And so it was kind of a race of who could take credit for taking the tolls off. Our son Forrest, who's now in his 30s, was a little kid then. And that was the only thing I think he remembered of any official event I did. That was really great. Dad threw the sign in the back of a pickup truck. And every time I travel over that, I just like, yeah, this is where the toll booths were, and people would have to fling a quarter or whatever into it.
Governor, as I was reviewing your record, what amazes me was it's there's this is it's real policy, but it was somewhat theatrical, right? So it was sort of like for the masses. You went down, you did this. I think about Trump at McDonald's or driving a garbage truck or what have you, and you did a lot of that, and again empowerment zones, welfare reform, death penalty, criminal reform, that sort of thing. You were really pushing a conservative agenda on just one right after the other. I look at things like your TANF. You increase the two-parent family here in Virginia with TANF reform by 180%. That's incredible. I mean, to have two parents in a home. Yeah.
Matt, on welfare reform, we ended up being the very first state to have a statewide welfare reform. Uh, Michigan, with John Engler and Tommy Thompson, Wisconsin had done it just in a few localities. I had a great Secretary of Health and Human Resources in Kay Coles James, who grew up on welfare. And so we made this statewide. And the way we measured welfare reform success is not how many people are getting welfare, is how many people are starting to lead independent, self-reliant lives and with whole families. And we also, part of that is that so many of these families, the father's not in the household. And if that father is not going to be there, he's going to have to be financially responsible. And so we went after these deadbeat dads. Why make the taxpayers pay for the children that they fathered when they should? And so we went after garnishing their wages, took away their hunting licenses, driving license, driver's license, and so forth. And we also required that women, mothers who came out to welfare, would have to identify who the father of the child was. Otherwise, they would get zero. And there were lawsuits against us. We won. And Virginia probably still has the highest paternity identification rate in the country at 99%. And I remember talking to the local social services fellow in Culpeper, and he says, and I was asking, how's it going? Because they were one of the very first uh, regions to we phased it in through different regions of the state. And he says, it's so amazing how many recollections were refreshed of what the guy's, not only his name, here's the kind of car he drives, here's his address, and so forth, and tracked him down. And so that, to me, life is a quest for independence. You don't want to be dependent on anyone else. You want to control your own destiny, just like a state wants to control its own destiny and have that individual sovereignty. And it's good for kids to see their mother grow up working, and it ended up helping out the workforce in a variety of ways. So I think it was very positive, and it's part of the reason why it is still a record. We had 312,000 net new jobs created during my 4 years as governor. And some of those added jobs were going to people who were previously on welfare.
As I talked to colleagues about this interview, several, in fact, last night, over cigars and adult beverages, one gentleman.
You seem sober now.
Yeah, no, I'm not trying to be sober all the time. Be sober minded, and be careful, but in moderation. So he said, Governor Allen probably was the best governor we've had in like 100 years. I mean, you really went in with an agenda, a conservative agenda. You have ideas. You exude ideas. They just fall all over the place, which is why I like you so much, because you're thinking, you're creating, you're doing the kind of the showmanship, getting out there, taking swings. And my producer, by the way, reminded me, said, do you tell George I said hello, because you were the NRSC chairman at some point when he was over there.
Oh, yeah, for the 2004 elections.
The National Senatorial Republican Committee. That's right. He reminded me of that. So you've been incredibly active. You're still active. And so tell folks kind of what are you doing these days in the sunset of politics? Maybe. Got to come back to that. But
all right. Well, first of all, yes, I'm not in the arena on the playing field anymore. I'm more of a coach, and spent a lot of time with Jason Miyares. He was our big focus. in this past election. Jason actually worked as my aide de camp in my 2000 Senate campaign. When we beat Chuck Robb, who was the incumbent at the time. He met his wife. She's a realtor. So, yeah, and people will ask me about, my record and view of things. And my view, and I tell everyone, number one, most important is integrity. Never make a promise you don't intend to keep. If you need more information, tell people you need more evidence to be persuaded or convinced of one side or the other. And then I think it's really important if you're running for office, particularly if you're running for governor. What do you want to do? What do you want to change? What do you want to reform? What are your initiatives? And go out amongst the people. I look at the people as the owners of the government and advocate and personalize it and have victims of crime who were raped by repeat offender go through the trauma of, and it takes a lot of courage to relive that, and then so you personalize it. And I think it's important. You don't run a campaign from an office in a swivel chair. You need to get out and have that, they call it retail politics, but get out there and get the message out to the people. And then if you win, if you're honored with the responsibility of serving, keep your promises. And so we were able to get these monumental reforms done, whether it's welfare reform or truth in sentencing or accountability in schools and a variety of other issues, with the Democrats in control of the legislature. We had to get a few Democrats to be co-sponsors of these bills. And so if you win, which we did, that's a mandate from the people, and they realized, the legislators, that all right, Allen won. He ran on this. Some of the people who voted for them also voted for me, and they ought to be listening to the people. So these days, I have my George Allen Strategies, business advice consulting, helping out some tribal 8As. I'm on some various corporate boards. Armada Hoffler's one of them. I'm also on the Appalachian School of Law Board of Trustees. It's something we started when I was governor. Probably the most interesting to your viewers and many people, I'm chairman of the Reagan Ranch Board of Governors, and that's preserving Ronald Reagan's ranch, Rancho del Cielo, Western White House when he was president, and his boyhood home in Dixon, Illinois. And this is with the Young America's Foundation, which is focused on young people, future generations that hopefully will have, similar to my common sense Jeffersonian conservative or maybe Reagan-esque conservative principles of getting things done for the people.
Right, and to that point, Governor, I mean, the thing that strikes me about this whole Trump, the era of Trump, the golden age of Trump, or what have you, is, I'm a Trumper. Just, I was with him long before he came down the aisle and all the thing, and been with him all the way. I liked his kind of his smash mouth football attitude about, the other side, because I think we're in that game. The game has changed. It's no longer speak no ill of your fellow Republican, i.e., the 11th commandment of Reagan. Trump broke all those rules, and so did many others, frankly, including our Senator John Warner, who ran, Marshall Coleman against Oliver North, and and led to that catastrophe. North loses to Rob, and you beat Rob, I guess, the next cycle. But Trump, it seems to me that he is, he's got some ideas, but really the party is the party of Trump, a person, a personality, and he's a big personality. He's a Winston Churchill kind of guy, certainly probably the most impactful political, person that we could, for years. You go back to Reagan, maybe. And then before that, I don't know, you go back to what, Lincoln or something. I mean, he's a very transformational person. But, he's got 3 years left, and the way the elections are looking, maybe just a year left if they go, if he loses the House, he becomes this lame duck, et cetera. What advice would you, and I'm sure you talked to the president, but what advice would you give to the president, looking at what we know? If you talk about tariffs early as we jumped on, but what would you tell him right now to kind of re-spark the agenda, so to speak?
Okay. And when Donald Trump was reelected and he had a 4-year term in effect, and that was it. I said, now he knows what it's like to be a governor of Virginia. You get elected, you got 4 years. And he's done what I always said, you need to start off at a full gallop with a loose cinch. You don't have time to waste. You got to get as much done as possible, as quickly as possible. And he's done that in many respects. And I think that the key things that why President Trump was elected was the economy and the border. He's done an outstanding job in controlling our southern border. There may be some ways that they could be better in implementing who they're running out of the country. Nonetheless, that's what he was elected to do. The other was the economy, and I think people don't recognize the benefit of passing the tax bill earlier this year. That but for extending his 2017 tax cuts, which were the biggest tax cuts since Ronald Reagan's in 1986, those were just fantastic. That 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act bill, and there were more jobs created, more investment, wages went way up. And if that expired, there'd be a gigantic tax increase facing all Americans and businesses throughout the United States of America. We'd be less competitive internationally. So that's really important that you need to celebrate your successes. Otherwise, they'll be off. And one of the problems that President Trump does, and I've known President Trump from the days in the 1980s when he had a USFL franchise, the New Jersey Generals, and my father's with the Chicago Blitz and Arizona Wranglers. They all worked together. They were friends. They're very good friends. We're very good friends. In fact, every time I see President Trump or anything, he'll bring up my father, which is great. And it's very hard.
The great, let's stop there because a lot of folks may not know, but your father was George Allen Sr., the coach of the Washington, can we say Redskins?
I consider the new name WC everywhere means water closet. So I call the new name Woke Commode.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. I'm a Cowboys fan, but I'll go with the Redskins any day of the week.
Well, congratulations. You should have had a resounding win against the Raiders, and maybe they'll get a defense this year. But regardless, but President Trump needs to focus on the economy. I think his energy policies are excellent. He's got a great team around him with Zeldin at EPA, Burgum at Interior, Wright with Secretary of Energy. And productive American energy is really our ace in the hole as a country. Energy is the lifeblood of our economy. And so all of that I think is great. It's realistic, it's practical, it'll bring down prices and so forth. Now, on the other hand, I think he's gotten very poor legal advice with these import taxes using IEPA, this International Emergency Economic Powers Act that does not grant to the president the power to impose taxes unilaterally, stating that it's somehow an emergency, that we're importing foreign-made films or coffee or toys or things that are not an emergency. And I'm one who believes you need to adhere to the Constitution and the rule of law. And so I think the Supreme Court is going to strike down that. Not that he can't, Congress has delegated tariff authority, but not using IEPA, which is what he's used for these taxes on every product from every country in the world. It needs to be more targeted. Target China, target steel or copper or something like that, but not everything. And so that's something that's deleterious to our economy. There's estimates from credible groups that it's $1,300 per household and added costs from these import taxes or tariffs. And conservatives are not for tax increases. And so I think that if the president, and I think he's done a great job in the Middle East, that is just fabulous what he's done in the Middle East. I think knocking out Iran's nuclear capabilities is great. His support of Israel, the Gaza settlement, this, that, and the other. I'd like to see him support Ukraine a little more. And I think he's realizing Putin's a lying KGB agent with it. And he believes in peace through strength. And so I think his foreign policy has been, especially the Middle East. And it was great in the first term, too, with the Abraham Accords. And as we speak, right now, he's meeting with the Saudi leaders. And and having the Saudis, and the Saudis are going to buy more military equipment from us, which is good for those who fabricate those planes here in the United States. So
Yeah, they're made, I think, in 435 congressional districts, Governor, for a reason.
yeah, that's interesting. Hey, Matt, you mentioned Newport News. One of the things, because Newport News Shipbuilding builds nuclear aircraft carriers and half of our nuclear subs. And whenever you wanted to get funding for for an aircraft carrier, there's so many vendors, suppliers, subcontractors that make some component part in every state in the union, which everyone's got some skin in the game. It helps you get the votes for the funding.
Oh, no, no, that program is never gonna be cut. You're not gonna reduce government that way.
Well, but as far as the federal government, even defense can be run more efficiently. But that is a paramount responsibility is of the federal government is national defense. Like when I was governor, I'd say our top two responsibilities, this is my view, of a state government are law enforcement and education. And the way you pay for them is with a vibrant economy where people are working, businesses are thriving, you get more revenues in. And and at the federal level, it's national defense. And I also think it's important to have treaties and not have the United States have to be the policeman of the world. I think NATO and alliances with Japan and South Korea and Australia, as well as NATO and others, help us project our power and have those allies also carrying some of the cost and burden of defending free people and free enterprise.
Right, right. I might push back gently on the fact, we're in 178 countries, the United States government. There are 194 in the world, according to, AI. And that's boots on the ground. And that's a big expense to pay. Now, it's 3% of the annual, I think, revenue, 3 to 5. But it's bigger than, 19 other nations, the Chinese, the Russians, the Germans, the UK. And I like Trump saying, "Hey, look to Europe, you gotta pony up, you gotta get." And I think it's a slow unwind. And I think it also sends a nice signal to support the Saudis and say, "Hey, look, here's some airplanes. We're gonna support Israel, but we're also gonna support you all." And this gets kind of into the Washingtonian, Washington's farewell address, right? Said, "Look, avoid entangling alliances, trade with everybody, but try not to be enemy. Watch the enemy thing too." And I think sometimes our policies can send a wrong signal when it comes to boots on the ground. But yeah, to your point,
Yeah, yeah, I understand what you're saying, Matt. But and President Trump's right. Every president was complaining about, in particular, let's talk about NATO, that some of these countries were freeloading and they weren't meeting their commitments. I mean, this is a contract, it's a treaty alliance. And some of these countries were not spending what they promised. I mean, if you're in a partnership or a contract, abide by the terms of your contract. And I think what Russia has done in Putin with his invasion of Ukraine, he's done more to solidify NATO than any jawboning any president has ever done. And you get Finland and Sweden have joined, and countries are not just at 2% of their economy for or their budget for military. Now it's going up to 5%. And I do think that all those European countries in NATO ought to be fulfilling their obligations, no question about it. The question about all these other places in the world, if the United States doesn't have an influence there, the ones that'll go right in will be China. China will go in there, and we're talking about all these rare earth minerals and critical elements and this, that, and the other. China will go in there. They'll build infrastructure. They'll have the government of some African country, for example, that may have some key mineral, and they'll be indebted to them. Then they end up corrupting that government. And so the United States, it's the United States and other freedom loving countries versus Russia, China, and Iran. I guess you could throw North Korea in with them. And it's kind of a bipolar world. I hate that it worries me that Russia and China are working so well together. And China will buy, and Russia's main source of revenue is oil and natural gas. And China will buy up every cubic inch, square foot of natural gas and every barrel of oil Russia can produce, and they get it at a lower price. And so that props up Putin's autocracy while keeping the communists getting the energy they need for their economy.
Well, as a country, we're also fairly indebted to China. Our Republican president, was it Richard Nixon, opened up the Great Wall of China to trade. Kissinger said, "We'll trade them into capitalism." Did not happen. During the 70-year Cold War with the Russians, or the Soviets at the time, we didn't trade with the Soviets. We just flat out don't trade with our enemies, right? We have a Cuba embargo right now because they're quote unquote the enemy. But I'll tell you what, if you look at the ledger on China, same communist government with, I think, certainly a little bit more dangerous than the Cubans. I just think that we brought them into the most favored nation status. I think it was President Clinton and Gingrich did that as a bipartisan effort, and we're paying the price for that. I think it's a very dangerous dance we're playing. But anyway,
Yeah, and then the communist Chinese are not the same as the Cuban communists or the Soviet communists. They want to get the best technologies. They send their students here to our country and other countries around the world. They have a. It's not the same. The Soviets and the Cubans worried about their people defecting. The Chinese are much more involved all over the world, and they have a heck of a manufacturing base. They have industrious, smart, hardworking people, and they're adversaries, but they're also competitors. And so, but to me, they're the greatest threat to us around the world is China. But Russia is one that can fuel them, and also China then provides armaments, as did Iran.
do you think the Chinese are a military threat or an economic threat? Where would you, when you say they're the number one threat, are you suggesting military?
They're their number one competitor economically, no question about it. We're the number one economy. They're number two. As far as the military is concerned, their military, the France has great avionics and aviation, but France is not an enemy. Nor is and Britain has air, and so does other countries that are on our side. So as far as a military threat, yes, they are a military threat as well. And they may have more ships than we do, but I think our quality is better. It's not quantity, it's quality. But they're getting stronger and stronger in AI and everything else. They cheat, they steal our intellectual property, and they're very industrious, smart people who are held back by their government. And as much it is surprising, the whole thing with WTO, and you're talking about in the late 90s, bringing them in. You figure, all right, they're going to see freedom and they're not going to want to go to be subjugated and limited. But somehow the Communist Party, one party rule continues.
Yeah, yeah, and we have a mayor in New York, by all practical, definitions, a communist, right? I mean, we've probably elected our first communist in America, in American history. Of course, Bernie Sanders, he's been there a few years, but I've set him aside a minute. So let me come back to Virginia a minute. So you talked about the number one and number two issues with, Virginia governor. One is education, and one of your comrades, to use a nice term.
Don't use a comrade, friends, colleagues.
Yeah, one of your colleagues who ran with you as lieutenant governor did not win, Michael Ferris. And Michael Ferris, the blessing of him not winning was he ran off and started this thing called the Homeschool Legal Defense Foundation. He started Patrick Henry College and went on and done all these great things that he may not have done had he won. And point I'm making is that education's changed quite a bit, right? I mean, there's now 3.5, 4 million people that are homeschooling their kids. You got parochial schools happening. And Governor, a dad of 5 kids, and the most we spent doing homeschool any one year was about $12,000 for all 5 kids, right? We are paying right now about close to $20,000 to educate one kid in the state of Virginia. That's a lot of money. And, and my kid can't go to Lafayette High School or Warwick High School here in Newport News and go play for that football team like the Tim Tebow bill down in Florida said you could do. What would you suggest, given this environment? This is new for, this was not an issue when you were running, but this is,
It was to some extent. But it's funny you bring this up because I was the number of students in Virginia that are homeschooled has gone way up, through the years. I said, I remember when I was a delegate, when I was running for Congress, running for governor, there was a guy named Will Shaw in Orange County and headed up the homeschooler parents. And there were just very few of them. But my natural Jeffersonian view is, let people do what they want. And I consider the most important unit, let's say, in our society as the family. It's where you learn right from wrong and manners and politeness and all of that. And so that was very few people. But I said, let them do it if they so desire. Don't limit them. And then one of the things that I think has really changed this whole dynamic in Virginia, and especially some of these lockdown states, was the pandemic, where parents started seeing this is what they're teaching our kids in school. This is not good civics, or it's not adequate, or it's not to their liking for whatever reason. And so all the government schools were shut down. The private schools, whether they were religious based or private, stayed open. You had pods of parents getting together trying to teach students because it's important. It's especially for younger kids. You can't teach kids over a computer. Their attention spans 30 seconds. And you need that personalized, individualized attention. And so that's where I think a lot of these alternatives, whether they're private schools or homeschooling, has really accelerated a great deal. And I think there should be choices. Now, as far as the state's concerned, you want to give people that latitude or that freedom to choose what they think is best for their children. I wouldn't want a government telling every parent you got to teach your kids, because not all parents have the time. Both parents are working. They don't have the ability to teach kids higher levels of mathematics or science.
Yeah, no question.
And so forth. And so you want to do that, but for most people, though, public schools is going to be their option. And you want to have high academic standards and accountability so that students graduating from high school know how to read and write and speak the English language, learn higher levels of science and math, know about economics and especially the free enterprise system, and know civics and history. In fact, I have been advocating, and they've been fussing in Virginia, and we got these standards done and testing in third, fifth, eighth, and end of high school. And we have the highest academic standards in the country. Our students in Virginia on these NAEP tests were doing great. Virginia is now really, really low, doing poorly on these NAEP tests. And Governor Youngkin was trying to recreate that got watered down, weakened, and because we stopped that social promotion of kids from grade to grade just because they're they're a year older. And so they're trying to get their history standards, which are the hardest ones to get everyone to agree on history standards. I said, at a bare minimum, just a minimum, every student graduating from a high school in Virginia ought to be able to pass the same tests that new citizens at naturalization ceremonies have to learn. And it's kind of basics. I think you ought to learn more than that. And Tennessee does this, Texas, other states have it. The Democrats in Virginia were against it. And I was asking our delegate, Ann Farrell Tate, and Lee Ware, delegate from Powhatan, what's their reason for being against this? This is something accepted by everyone, just the naturalization test.
Yeah.
And they said they think the tests are too stressful for the kids. Gee, if you don't test, you got to have a scoreboard. You don't watch a basketball game and guess what the score is. You got to have what gets measured gets better. And it's this is some of the very worst things of this whole pandemic, particularly in Virginia, where I was just disgusted with the timid acquiescence of Virginians, the state of Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death, where they're shutting down schools, shutting down businesses, making people be muzzled, kept the state government alcohol stores open. But the worst was what this did to young kids who missed 2 years of learning, and I'm not sure if they'll ever catch up. And so I just think education is one of those keys to success in life. Having a good home and home life and structure from a family and an education, statistically and by every measurement, are the best indicators of success in life.
Yeah, yeah.
And however they get the education, was it private school, homeschool, or public school? And I think Virginia can learn a lot from North Carolina and what they've done with this school choice type approach.
I was in a parade, the Republican Party up in Alexandria, Virginia, who was it? And that was as you know, you laugh because it's a very small party. All 10 of us were standing on King Street, and but oddly enough, there was one Democrat, maybe two, it was an African American woman and her son, and she said, "Well, this is where the Democrats are supposed to stand." I'm like, "Well, is it just you?" I mean, I'm shocked. And this is when Daniel Gade was our Senate nominee. Danny and I were sitting just, yucking it up. And I turned to her, I said, what makes you a Democrat? And she said, well, all the things. And that's, well, like what things? Like name one. She says, well, just all the things. I said, like school choice, because you can't choose a school and you're trapped in a zip code because of the color of your skin. And she said, well, you got me on that one. And I said, well, it only takes one step. You take one step forward, you're going to be in the Republican Party. And by the time they sounded the whistle, there were no Democrats, and she had walked away and decided not to walk. But we got to make these cases, right? We got to fight for these things. Well, let me shift gears to 2025. Here we are, just a few weeks after the election here in Virginia. It did not go as expected, and a couple things. We've got what happened, and let me start there a minute. I went and looked at the winsome numbers. And this is interesting. If you go to the Virginia Department of Elections, you can, find out what the vote was. And you can key in the vote totals per section. Like, for example, early voting. What was the vote early voting? What was the vote total on election day? What about mailed absentee ballots? What about provisional? And they even have post-election. So they have post-election count here. And Spanberger wins post-election 80-20. That's the percent. She wins the provisional ballots 70-30. She wins early voting 57-43. And bigger than that, she wins absentee 77-23. There are 247,442 absentee ballots to her 72,615.
That's a mail-in.
That's mail-in, mailed absentee. Governor, there's stories right now of votes coming out of P.O. boxes in Arlington, Virginia, 30, 40, 50 people voting from a UPS store in Arlington, Virginia. I don't know where you are in this, and I ran a race, as you know, down in Newport News, and on election night in a heavily Democrat district, blue district, I was down by 5 points with 95% counted. When the early voting and absentee came in, I was down 17. Republican. So let me go one step further. On election day, the total was 54 Spanberger, 46 for Winsome. All right, and that's a it's not a it's a closer number, especially when you pull out all those other numbers. So we can focus in on election day and throw out the absentees, which, by the way, the absentees and early voting and provisional is something that Jimmy Carter and Jim Baker did a bicentennial blue ribbon, bipartisan campaign to look at early voting. They said, you got to get rid of it. Fraud, abuse, it's happening right here. And every country, almost in the free, nation of free countries, got rid of absentee or early voting, except us. The French don't do it. The EU's throwing it out. Most of Latin and South America, they know where the steel is. And I just look at these numbers and think, if we could, you know, just focus on election day voting, I feel like we'd be competitive any day with any candidate anywhere in the country. What say you?
Okay, you cover a bunch of things there. The provisional or late votes are very, very few. The big ones are early voting, in person, mail-in voting, and election day voting. Those are the three big globs. The others are,
Small, right?
yeah, they're very, very small. And an interesting analysis, and everything you're saying is true as far as numbers are concerned. Jason Miyares won election day voting. John Reed lost. Sears lost election day voting. Now, Virginia's got several problems. The main one, and this year's probably a prime example, is they start voting in September. It's not just a couple weeks before. Even New York City, their early voting is maybe a week out, or at most 2 weeks out. Ours is
45 days or something. Yeah.
yeah, 45 days. Well, then in early October, you already had so many people. I mean, 500, 600, 700,000 people voted before all these texts,
Revelation came out, right?
revelations about Jay Jones a few years ago, wanting to see a political somebody in another party's children die in their mother's arms, and deceiving the court in New Kent County for his reckless driving charge, and did 500 hours supposedly of community service for his own political action committee. And so you already had a large number of people voted. And just because you and I and those who follow this closely know what had happened when that got all revealed in October 3rd or whatever the date was, it took until weeks before, some TV stations never covered it. Just because we see it doesn't mean all the voters have. And so that shows that as people found out about it, Jason Miyares, people thought Jay Jones was unfit beyond his soft coddling of criminals record. He was unfit to be Attorney General of Virginia. And so this early voting, really early voting, for 45 days before an election in Virginia, was put in during the paranoid hypochondriac days of COVID, that all people had to be apart in a way. And so the Democrats saw that they could more likely identify who their voters were and get them to vote early. Whether it's Susan and I vote by mail, but I go to our local polls also on election day. I like to go there, and I walk in to the voting place, and I said, "All right, which one of y'all is, 4 people at a table?" I said, "Which one of y'all has a sense of humor?" And most will have a sullen look. One will smile and say, "I'm going to you. I just wanted to make sure." So I give them my card, my driver's license and so forth. And you should have identification. And they'll say, "Well, Mr. Allen or Governor Allen, we see you have already voted." I said, "Good. I trust you all, but I want to verify."
Yeah, I remember I was working the polls in Arlington, Virginia. It may have been probably 93 when you ran as governor, I believe. And I remember we got our sealed bags from, you get to the fire station at 5 o'clock in the morning. You open the garage doors, you set everything up, and then you have to open the bags from Richmond. They send you all the kind of some of the things. And I remember I opened the bag up, and out came Clinton Gore buttons. This had to be early. And they came out. They were sealed from Richmond. And I said, "Hey, hold up. And we called the Washington Times in. They did a story, but no, it just went nowhere."
Well, here's what we got. If Republicans or conservatives, especially after this terrible campaign and losses, they're not going to change any of these in Virginia. My view is, if these are the rules, we have to go to gun shows, NRA conventions, churches, do what the Democrats do. There are people who we can identify as most likely to be on our side. And I know Governor Youngkin and even President Trump in recent elections were trying to get people to bank their votes, vote early. Then we don't have to send emails to you, and we don't have to do robocalls and we don't need to be mailing to you, saves you money. They're not going to change it. So what we need to do, and in fact, through the years, you're seeing more and more Republicans or conservatives voting early. Then at one point it was like 10-1 Democrats. Now it may be, I don't know, 6-3 or 2-1 or whatever it may be with it. But the I I'm not. I think the Democrats are better organized in identifying their voters, motivating them to vote. The big drop off in voting in Virginia, regardless of whether, for example, generally speaking, in rural areas and conservative areas, there's less early voting, less mail in voting, folks vote in person on election day. But the problem in this election for Republicans were that places like Southwest Virginia that voted really strong for President Trump. I mean, in fact, John McLaughlin, who's Trump's pollster, was also my pollster. He says in Virginia there's 600,000 people who voted for Trump who didn't vote, and so you saw a big drop off in voting in Southwest Virginia, Virginia Beach, where I live, and Chesapeake, that are the Republicans to win, you got to get the vote out strong west of the Blue Ridge, rural areas,
Yeah.
and not just win Chesapeake and Virginia Beach. You got to win them big. That's how Glenn Youngkin won, and he won by 1.9%. It's hard for people with our philosophy to win in Virginia. You got to run a perfect campaign motivating people to vote, whatever method they do, whether it's mail in person or regardless. And we just our candidate for governor is tough for the lower part of the ticket, down the ticket, in a presidential race or a governor's race,
Yeah.
to have that anchor or that political gravity that Jason ran much stronger. By far, that Jason Miyares ran very strong, but still, it was the antipathy, whatever, upset with the way things are in Virginia, the economy, the President Trump, whatever. The Democrats were more motivated and they got their vote out, and the Republican candidates did not. And it's tough when the top of the ticket's not running a good campaign on issues that matter to the people. It is tough for down ticket to surmount.
Yeah, you don't pick a fight with MAGA either, and I mean, you just can't do that and expect an endorsement from the president when you've unendorsed him, right? So that's a problem, and I think
Yeah, Matt, I was reading with John McLaughlin. Again, he's President Trump's pollster. And they have these elections in Nassau County, which is Long Island, New York. And the Republicans fully endorsed President Trump. And they won. They won. Meanwhile, of course, Citarelli, I thought, was an excellent candidate in New Jersey, but he got trounced. And obviously, Sears got trounced. And Republicans generally lost all across the country. And so you end up with these big political waves that you don't realize how big it is until after the election. But if you're splitting your own base, especially in any place like New York and New Jersey and Virginia, vote about the same. This is shocking, Matt, to most people, but Trump lost New Jersey in 2024 by 6%. He lost Virginia by 6%. And Virginia, when you look at where the votes are, it's 40% plus out of Northern Virginia, depending how far you want to go. Then you get the inner cities. Then you get all these government college towns like Charlottesville, Harrisonburg, Blacksburg, Williamsburg. And these government college towns, they're all left. Heck, the University of Virginia students earlier this year, they had a referendum asking the Board of Visitors to divest, sanction, and boycott any company that does business with Israel.
Yeah.
And it's 67%, and they had a big turnout of votes. 67% voted to boycott, sanction, divest from companies that do business with Israel. So, I mean, that's Mr. Jefferson's university in the way it is these days, which is generally shameful, ridiculous, or detestable.
All right, so you need to fire up the base here a little bit because we're headed into a January where if I look at the bills that the Democrats want to pass, and said they'd pass, like they're going to increase the minimum wage to $15. Now, there's going to be an economics lesson for most Virginians the hard way, right? We're going to learn this the hard way. They're going to
It's really going to hurt small businesses.
Yep, it's going to hurt small businesses, family-owned restaurants, all this kind. Outlaw the sale of semi-automatic firearms. Okay, well, there is a thing called the Second Amendment. That's going to be a toughie.
Yeah, and that'll increase the sale of semi-automatic firearms.
that'll be an economic response. Yeah, oh, that's right.
Barack Obama did more for the sale of ammunition and semi-automatics than anyone.
Yeah, no. In fact, on that note, I think the last time I saw this stat from the NRA was that African American women are the single largest purchaser of firearms. And again, campaigning door to door in Newport News, Virginia, I did see that. I campaigned in urban neighborhoods, and it was like, wow, okay, they get the Second Amendment.
A lot of that was during the pandemic when these weak leaders at the state and local level were allowing all this looting and rioting and all that to go on. The biggest new owners or buyers of guns and concealed carry permits were women, regardless of race.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, things like mandate. Yeah, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to give you a couple more here. Mandates that landlord offer payment plan to a tenant without interest when the tenant is not paid rent for a month. That's one. Here's another. Allows a court to decrease criminal's probation period without a hearing or notification to the victim. So this is you led the way on let's return to the death penalty, I believe.
Well, yeah. Well, they've abolished the death penalty in Virginia. They're going to let more felons out of prison. The result of that's going to be more victims of crime. In fact, they've already did it, and Governor Youngkin wasn't able to reverse this. But they let out about 9,000 felons from prison, and the last statistic I saw, 49.8%, approximately 50% of them were rearrested for crimes again. And these aren't incidental crimes. These are murder, manslaughter, rape, assault, abduction, and so forth. So we're going to end up with less safe communities as they coddle these criminals.
It removes the term illegal alien from Virginia's legal code. I've just throw that as a bonus. Okay, fine. Right. And so and a lot of this has to do with education, teaching race theory, and hiring practices, which go directly against, the Trump administration. And they've gotten involved in your alma mater, UVA, on this issue. They've got there's the DOJ has an investigation at George Mason University, my alma mater, on this issue. So I could go on.
Here, let me add to what else they're going to do, which is going to affect all those things you say are true. And you could look at the 400 bills that Governor Youngkin vetoed and figure they're going to try to ram some of these through as well. They're going to completely legalize the sale of recreational marijuana. I suspect if you look at other states like Colorado and Oregon, we're going to end up with more wrecks, and our auto insurance is going to go up. As far as schools are concerned, they're going to ram through more collective bargaining for teachers, local government employees. The only people who will benefit from that, Matt, will be lawyers. There'll be more lawyers hired by the locality to negotiate with the union bosses' lawyers. But that's just another impediment into parents' interaction with their schools, because they got to have collective bargaining with the teachers' unions. They're going to have state government employees with being unionized and collective bargaining. Abigail Spanberger, as governor, as a candidate, said she'd want project labor agreements for major projects in Virginia. A project labor agreement means, for your listeners, that you have to deal with unionized construction companies, which is terrible especially a place like Northern Virginia,
Yeah.
where you could get these construction companies out of New Jersey or Pennsylvania, because ours are non-unionized. The cost of the taxpayers for these union jobs uh, and projects are 20 to 30% more for it. And they're talking about reforming our right to work law. Our right to work law is a
Not reform. I want to eradicate it, Governor. I want to get rid of it.
Well, of course, they'd like to eradicate it, but Governor-elect Spanberger said she just wanted to reform it. What needs to be reformed? We are the furthest. I spent more time as governor recruiting business and expanding business to our state. The first words out of my mouth was Virginia's the furthest state north on the eastern seaboard with a right to work law. If you don't have that worker freedom and right to work, where a worker is not compelled to pay union dues as a condition of holding a job, if you don't have that law, you're not even on the field of competition to lose. If Virginia does something to harm our right to work law, it'll be great for Tennessee, the Carolinas, Georgia, Florida, and it'll be irreparable harm to Virginia if that happens. And then she says she wants to reduce. She's promised. Governor-elect Spanberger promised she's going to reduce power bills, electricity bills. That's affordability. Well, one of the first things she wants to do is force Virginia back into what is called a regional greenhouse gas idiocy. They don't say idiocy.
Yeah.
Initiative. This is a carbon tax. It is a 3% tax onto everyone's monthly power bill to send this money to high cost, losing population northeastern states to somehow change the weather. Even Pennsylvania said they're not going to join it, but Maryland, New Jersey, and all those loser states up north are paying it. Now, thanks to Jason Miyares and Governor Youngkin, we got out of that.
Right.
But Virginia's power bills right now, you just compare it. Our power bills are so much more, significantly more than Tennessee and more than North Carolina. You have added to our power bills right now about 5% for what's called the Virginia Clean Economy Act. Idiots. It's just whimsical foolishness that we're going to rely on solar and wind, intermittent, unreliable sources. Then there's another 3% for the Renewable Fuels Act. Then you got this offshore wind scam. President Trump said it right. These are scams. It's the Green News scam in Virginia, and that's adding 8% to everyone's power bill for it's well over $11 billion now. It'll work 40% of the time, 3 out of 7 days of the week. And so that's Virginia's only going to have higher electricity bills. This is not going to make us more affordable. It'll make us more costly and less desirable and competitive.
Less competitive, right? I mean, we're losing a net 35 to 45,000 people every year in the state. We are losing people, which means we're going to lose congressional districts and influence. And those folks, I imagine, are headed south to green pastures, right?
Yeah, I will say, Matt, people and businesses are not trees. People and businesses can and do move. Virginia, for the last before Youngkin came in, we're losing population, and the Carolinas, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, out west, Arizona and Texas, and those states were growing, and California, New Jersey, New York, Illinois were big losers, as was Virginia. It was a slight decrease, but a decrease. There was a slight ascent in the last 2 years with Youngkin, but people just, it's frustrating to me, man, that they don't get it.
Yeah, it's dynamic view, right? Republicans know that. I mean, I was on a campaign years ago to eliminate the federal, state, and gift tax, right? Which is, I think, $12 billion a year.
The death.
Yeah, the death tax, otherwise known as a death tax, right? So we were working on that issue. And the Dems' argument was, well, if you cut that tax, we're not going to have $12 billion a year coming into the federal treasury, period, full stop. We said, well, actually, if you cut the tax, that's a static view of analysis, by the way. You have a tax and you're going to raise that much money, and that people don't react to that tax is how they think of it, right? But if you cut the tax, what do people do? They invest, they create jobs. You're actually going to have more revenue to the treasury if you cut the darn tax than if you keep it in place, because people react that way. And it's just it's really a whole different worldview of the way we see things versus the left. But I'm about out of time, Governor. And
Yeah, well, by the way, that applies to the capital gains tax as well.
yeah,
And these in these states, I get you, the economic object lessons are states like New York, New Jersey, and California. California are the best. I mean, it's a beautiful state, great weather, and people are leaving. They're leaving because it costs too much. Their taxes, their regulations.
and it's unsafe, right? So you got a crime piece. It's unsafe. It costs too much money. The education's terrible. We don't want our kids to learn CRT and hate each other. We want them to learn American history and math, reading, writing, arithmetic, get the politics out. But we put the politics in today, Governor. Thank you for coming. Tell people, are you on social media at all? Do you do all that stuff?
Yeah, I have a Twitter and Facebook. Facebook, I find the most fun with people. When I'll post things, some of the things I've posted are what we've been talking about. I use a lot of statistics from the Tax Foundation
Yeah, good.
or from Steve Moore's Committee to Unleash Prosperity, and then other pictures of various things that I'm doing.
That's terrific. And let me, okay, so this is my final question. You're well read. You're in politics. Someone wants to go into politics, or a young man or a woman. What do you, and you fought. I mean, you ran for office, you lost, you run again, you won, you lose. You just have stayed at it. I mean, you've really been a very, I think about Nigel Farage in England. He's run and run, he loses, and now he may be the next prime minister of England, it looks like. But
It'd be much better than what they have.
oh, much better. Tell me, what would you tell a young person to read? What books have influenced you in the political sphere? Anything you would point to?
Well, I love the Declaration of Independence. It is a bill of particulars of why we seceded from the British monarchy. And if you read that and understand it, understand what they were doing and what we wanted to do, read the Constitution. I'd read the writings of I think George Will's good. I think that Thomas Sowell is good to read. I'm talking about present day folks. Peggy Noonan. I read what Ronald Reagan wrote. I think that's good to read as well. Uh, find, but you have to be guided by certain principles and postulates of what's appropriate for government to be involved in, and reading and hearing a variety of ideas. Look at what different states are doing or what different nations are doing. You can learn from Estonia what Estonia did when they got their freedom. They put in reading. Oh shoot, what's his name? Oh, oh gosh, he's from Chicago. The Economist.
Milton Friedman, or
Milton Friedman, that's it. They put in Milton Friedman's flat taxes, this, that, and the other, and Estonia's doing great economically for a small country. But read Milton Friedman. Really great principles and ideas. And then you read some of the classics and Montesquieu and Thomas Paine and so forth, and Jefferson, obviously.
sure, Notes of the State of Virginia, maybe.
Oh yeah, that's what I give. Hey Matt, I give people that. It's a book I give to everyone who worked for me. The Notes on the State of Virginia, which I think is fascinating. French, because the French were supporting our secession from Britain. Thank goodness we had de Grasse and the French fleet and Lafayette and Rochambeau and all the rest. But they were asking about Virginia. He was just asking details of Jefferson about Virginia. He ends up writing a book on the notes on the state of Virginia. But read the classics, classical conservative or the foundations of our country. And obviously, you can read the Constitution, which is kind of the bylaws of how we govern. And it's an ingenious document with all the checks and balances. And remember, the Constitution was created to protect our individual rights. It's not to protect the government. It's to have checks and balances so that our freedoms, our natural rights, our God-given rights are protected under the rule of law.
Governor, you sound like a candidate for office. Are we going to see you jump at. There's several openings right now.
Yeah, there might be, but I'll encourage others and support good ones to get back on the playing field.
Very good. Well, God bless you. Thanks for coming, and we'll send you the wrap up on this. You can use it in social media and Facebook and all that, and so we'll be back in touch.
All right, thank you, Matt, and stay strong for freedom.
Good. Thank you, Governor. God bless you.
Against the Current podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.